Today I'm going to be showing you how to do the parchment paper method for fabric collage using this apple pattern, which I have free on my Facebook group, Collage Quilts with Collage Cottage. I will have that linked below. So let's get started. I have my pattern here with a color photo to check out which kind of fabrics I want. I've got all my fabrics here that I've already sort of pre-cut to size. I don't normally do that. I normally have big sections of fabric and I'm going through my pattern as I go, but since this one is so small and easy, I've already kind of picked out my fabrics and cut them to size. I have light Steam-A-Seam 2. This is what I like to use for the interfacing. It's light and you iron it on and it allows you to re-piece the fabric pieces if you mess up. And then I have my parchment paper. So starting out, I'm going to take a piece of parchment paper that will cover the whole pattern. This one is nice and small, but obviously patterns can be pretty large sometimes, so I buy the Costco size parchment paper. And I will cut this to size so that I can use my extra parchment paper for the piecing. And I fit that right over the pattern. I'm using Karen K Buckley scissors, which are really great for fabric collage. They reduce the amount of fraying that you have along the edges. And then I tape my pattern down, which is difficult. Sometimes I use pins because the tape doesn't actually stick very well to the parchment paper. But I'm using tape today because all of my pins are in use. So when I'm making these collages, I usually start with like a bigger piece, especially for this very small pattern. But sometimes when you're starting with something big, it's hard to know where to start. And sometimes I'll just start from the bottom up or the top down, or sometimes some of the bigger pieces and then the smaller pieces on top. You'll see what I mean and why that gets difficult sometimes. But for this one, I'm going to start with the bigger piece here. And we'll be using another piece of parchment paper to go over top of this, and that's what we're going to trace our piece on. I'm just going to cut this parchment paper about to size so that I'm not working with a ton of extra. I'll place that over my pattern. This big piece of fabric is going to go underneath all of this here. So I'm going to trace it a little bit bigger on that side because I know that it's going to go underneath all of my other pieces. And then on this outside edge, I'm going to trace exactly the outline because that one is not going underneath anything. So I'm tracing that onto my parchment paper. This is the darkest sort of purpley red color that I have right now. So that's what I'm going to be using for this big piece. It's about this big. Right now it has no Steam-A-Seam on the back. So I will show you how I put that on. It comes in a big sheet, but I have some that are already cut up and used. I know I need about this big of one, so that looks like it's going to be perfect. I will cut it close to what I think I'm going to need. And then you peel part of this back. It's like a fusible. And I actually save this to trace some of my other shapes. This part has like a little sticky back on it, and I'm going to put it on my fabric. I think I'll put it this way. and iron that down. That's done. It's kind of hot. And then I will place my traced shape on top of this. I'm going to pin it down just because it's a larger shape. Some of the smaller ones you can kind of just wing it. But the long ones I like to pin down so that I'm not making mistakes as I cut. And then you cut around your shape. And then I will save my scraps in my little scrap bucket I keep right next to me so I can just throw it in there. And I save some of these bigger pieces too because we will have smaller shapes that we're going to be tracing later. So this does become a mess sometimes. Save that piece too. And then this is my shape for the outside of my apple. So usually what I do next is take this steam-a-seam off of the back. Sometimes I need to make a little slice in it, peel it off. So I will just place that piece on top of the parchment paper and it'll kind of stick. I'm not going to iron it down yet because I'm going to be making this next part. We'll move on to this bigger piece here, which I have chosen this fabric for. Let's see. Here's a piece. Now this piece is going to be going on top of this piece. So I am going to, and then as you go you can decide it's going to go on top of this piece, but maybe under this piece. Will it go on top of your other pieces here or underneath them? I think I'm going to put it underneath these pieces and on top of these pieces here. So I'm going to peel this back and trace my bigger piece. So I know it's going on top here. So I can trace right along that line. Outside edge right along that line, and then I'm putting it underneath these pieces so I'm making it a little bit larger than the actual shape. This one doesn't have steam-a-seam on it yet. We'll see if this is big enough. It is. I save every last bit of steam-a-seam because when you're making something small, you need these tiny little pieces. Even for like animal eyes and such, they get really, really tiny. So you just save everything. You'll probably use it. Peel this off, save my extra. Place my shape on top and cut around. So now I will replace my larger piece. And place it on top here. I know I'm off a little bit. You can kind of lift it up and see if you're right on top there. But the great thing about fabric collage is it doesn't have to be perfect. So now it's sticking on there. Sometimes on my bigger projects, I will iron it down. And sometimes I'll just iron the edge that is attached to that fabric already, as long as I know that it's not going anywhere. So I know I like that. I'm gonna go ahead and iron that down. And I have a little tiny iron to do fabric collage. It's just packed away somewhere right now, so it's totally fine if you need to use your large iron. It works. So moving on, I think next I'm gonna do this piece here. And this is the color, it's kind of like a brown that I've chosen for this top here. I'm gonna pull my collage back. Now you can see on the picture that the brown goes around here, and then on top you have this tan. So what I'm gonna do, and you have the stem on top of that as well. What I'm going to do is make this entire piece, and then we'll be putting the tan on top of that. So you're not making two separate pieces of the brown, you're making one big piece, and then the tan will go on top of that. So I will find a piece here, trace this entire thing, and I know that I've put this on top, so I'm gonna kind of bring this underneath here where I've made one that goes on top, and then I know that I've made my big piece to go underneath. So I will bring this back up and follow that line again. It does get complicated when you have lots of little pieces, but you'll kind of be able to see as you go. And then when you have something like this, like I might have just messed this up a little bit by ironing it, because these pieces are now attached. I can pull it apart, but sometimes if you iron it, you can't pull those apart anymore. So it is nice to not iron until you're completely finished. Okay, so I know I've got it going on top of this big piece, but under this piece here, I'm going to place that. I like the looks of that. I'm just gonna iron it down. Okay. Next, I'm not going to do this tan part quite yet because it looks like it's on top of this deeper red here, and then we've got sort of a pinkish red and a very light pink here. So next, I think I will go ahead and do this brighter red, which is this big piece here. It is completely underneath the pinks here. So I'm gonna make this whole shape and then make the smaller pieces to go on top. And I know that it's going underneath this one, right? Yeah, it's going underneath the brown, but on top of this darker red. So pull this whole thing back. And it's gonna be going underneath that tan up there too. So I'm gonna make it a little bit bigger up here. Follow the line on the outside edge. I'm gonna have it going underneath that pink one. So underneath here. But on top of the dark red. So back to the line here. And then underneath the dark brown up top. Okay. So that's my shape. For that red, I have little polka dots, and I'm gonna need another piece of steam machine here. Now, I'm not gonna place this on there yet. I know I have it here. What I'm gonna do next is trace the smaller pinkish pieces that go on top of this. Iron those onto here first, and then iron this big piece on after all of that. So next is the pink and a lighter pink on top. Pull this back, trace the bigger piece. And I can just trace right around. Oops. And I know it's going underneath the light pink, so I'll go underneath the light pink and follow the edge along the rest. And then I will go ahead and while that's cooling, I will go ahead and trace the smaller one, and it's just going to be exactly its own shape because it's the uppermost piece. Okay, so we'll start with the darker pink. That shape, it's gonna go on top there, somewhat like that. But I will wait until I have this tiny little one done. So we've got the dark red, the peachy pink, and then the light one that goes right on top there, somewhat like that. It doesn't have to be perfect, but sometimes what I'll do is place this one here, and then I know that this shape is going here like this. Double check. Peel this one off. Double check my shape again. Stick right onto that fabric. I have not peeled the steam seam off of this bigger piece yet, but I did with the little one, so I know that's where I want it to stick. I'm gonna iron it down. Then I'll do that with this next piece. I have that somewhat like this, and this one goes about there. Sometimes I just eyeball those pieces. I'll lift it up and just make sure I'm close to the outline there. Again. Get a little more. I want it kind of overlapping into that red piece. I think I like it there, so I'm gonna iron that down to the big piece, and that one doesn't have the steam seam off of it yet. And then I don't think I'm going to place this piece yet because I think I want to do this little pink part here next. So I've got my fabric here. I could have traced both this big piece and this small piece if I knew that I was going to be using this fabric for both, and cut enough steam seam to do both. That's what I normally do. But I didn't do that this time, so I will be putting another piece of steam seam on there. I know that this pink piece is going to be going on top of the dark red, but underneath this other sort of rusty red color. So I will trace as such. So on top of the dark red, perfect outline here, and then underneath, so make it a little bit bigger than that outline. Okay, so I've made my tiny little piece here. I'm gonna put that one on first. And it goes here, there, and then I will put this big piece on here to go on top. So it's coming together. I like it right there, so I will go ahead and iron that on next. So let's say I place this, like accidentally put it like this, and I pressed it down. What the Steam-A-Seam allows you to do is just pick that right back up and move it. It's kind of like a sticker that loses its stick. But once you iron it, it is difficult to get it back up from the edges. So you want to make sure you have it placed where you want it before you iron. And then we'll move on to this tan and the stem and our leaf. That is good to go. There's our apple. And we'll do this little tan part next. It's going right on top. The only thing it's going to be going underneath a tad is the stem. So let's see if this long piece will work for me. Sure it will. So I'm just tracing this exactly with a tiny piece that goes under the stem. It barely, might not even go under the stem at all. There we go. That's a tan one. Now I'm using this tan scrap that already has Steam-A-Seam on it. It came from a different project. That's why I saved these. So I can use them again. Put this one on. It's gonna be tough to peel. Okay, so I can see my edge here. No, it goes on top. Place it right there and iron it down. We'll move on to our leaf next. We'll do the stem last because it's on top of that leaf. So I've got a darker and a lighter portion of the leaf. I've got my darker, my lighter, and then my sort of yellow-green leaf stem here. We'll start with the darker, and then on top of that the lighter, and then on top of that the stem. Follow the outline here, but I know it's going underneath that lighter leaf, so I'm making it a little bit bigger. You can see that. There. And then the lighter green. The lighter green is just going to be its regular outline because it's sort of going on top of that darker green. You can see how a little fabric goes a long way in fabric collage. A fat quarter will last me several collages. So I am ending up with a huge stash. And then when you start other collages that use similar colors, you don't have to go buy more fabric. This one goes right on top here. I'm gonna iron, press that leaf down. And we'll move on to the leaf stem and the apple stem. I'm gonna take this whole thing off. It stays together because I've ironed those two pieces together. And then the stem goes to the apple stem. I'm gonna put it slightly underneath the apple stem. Gonna be my light green color here. my leaf back down. On there, it's very narrow. I'm gonna iron it onto the leaf, but not onto the apple. And this is what that little tiny iron is good for, but the big iron works just fine. Okay, so the leaf is one piece now. Move that off to the side, and we'll finish with our stem. Got a brown for the stem. Tracing it perfectly because it is on top of everything else. This is an old piece. I already have steam on there. Okay, so I'll put my leaf back on. And go ahead and place that these. I'm putting it on top of the narrow piece of leaf, and then I will hopefully lift all that back up. Put on our apple. My leaf piece there is sticking out a little bit. I don't want that, so I'm going to move it a little bit here. There we go. Okay. I like how that looks, so I'm going to press it down. So our apple is complete. I have not yet picked a background, but I'm just going to show you how it works once it's done. Let's say I've picked this black for my background. You can take this entire apple now, all of the pieces are stuck together, and place it on your background. And then you are done with this. The next step is your quilting. So you will take this piece, put your batting and your backing on, and quilt it down. I quilt along every single edge when I'm doing a fabric collage, for the most part. If there's something tiny that I miss, I'm not too worried about it because I'm usually using these as wall hangings. But if you're using it as a quilt or a pillowcase or something like that, you want to make sure you really get them quilted down. And the back will look like a mess of threads after you do all of that. You can place another piece of fabric on top of that and then bind it to hide those threads. And that is how you do the parchment paper method for fabric collage. Again, you can find this apple pattern free on the Facebook group Collage Quilts with Collage Cottage. That'll be linked below. And I hope you enjoy and find a passion for doing this like I have.